This is Wheelbearings. I'm Dan Roth.
And I am Sam Abu-Al-Samad.
So we're going to revisit a little bit of a topic this week, but also we've got some big doings in Europe to talk about. But first, of course, we're going to start with what we're driving. And so, Sam, what have you been wheeling around this week?
I have an Acura MDX, the 2017 MDX, which is Acura's big SUV crossover thing. And so this one, it got a refresh for the 2017 model year, and it's the first Acura to get their new grille that they debuted last year on the Precision concept at the Detroit Auto Show last year. So the beak or the buck tooth is finally gone, at least from this one, and it'll be disappearing from the rest of the Acura lineup over the next year or so as the rest of their models are updated or redesigned. Probably the next one to get the change will be the RDX, which I think is going to be getting a redesign. It's due for a redesign probably in the next few months. We may see it as soon as the New York Auto Show in April. The MDX is overall, I like it a lot. For a big 3-row SUV. There are a few details I'm not crazy about. Probably the most prominent one, because the MDX shares its platform with the Honda Pilot, which got a redesign about a year and a half ago. And one of the unfortunate features that it shares with the Pilot is the shift mechanism. It's yet another case of designers and or engineers trying to be creative with how they do these electronic shifters for their automatic transmissions. And this is probably one of the weirdest and most non-intuitive I've tried. Have you driven? Buttons.
I have driven I haven't driven this new one, but
have you driven the Pilot?
Yeah, it's the buttons.
Yeah. Right? Well, it's a combination of buttons and switches. So you have for park, there's kind of a rectangular button, and then for reverse, to get reverse, there's a switch that you pull back on that's almost like a window switch. And then behind that, you have the drive/sport button, which is a round button that looks like the engine stop start button. So I mean, it's all these completely different, totally incongruous elements. It doesn't make sense. I mean, if you, I don't know. I don't like it. I didn't like it on the Pilot, and I don't like it on this one.
I mean, my impression is that they're trying to bring a little bit of NSX or race car heritage, especially given the way they've positioned the brand in the marketing, to every Acura. This feels very much like the kind of
but this debuted on the Honda, on the Pilot.
No, I know, but it just it feels like the kind of stuff we've seen. We first saw these kind of buttony shifters on racing cars, the back, I don't know, a decade or two ago. And I don't know, I guess I'm not trying to actually make an excuse for it, because, they're fixing what wasn't broken. But, and so the MDX too, like the other thing that I get kind of disappointed about with it, even though the new one looks a lot better, especially now that the Pilot has been so redone, like I'm not sure I can justify the MDX.
Yeah. I mean, it's not, aside from the design, it's not notably better than a Pilot, in any particular way. If you get a high-end Pilot, it's got nice leather interior and everything as well. So there's, and in fact, one of the features that the Pilot has that the MDX does not, because this was a mid-cycle refresh, but not a complete redesign, which the Pilot was. So the MDX is probably going to be another year or two before it gets a complete rework. The Pilot, has Honda's touch radio, which has support for Android Auto and Apple CarPlay. The MDX still has the older Acura infotainment system, which is a dual screen setup. So you have a lower screen, which is a touch screen with haptic feedback when you press the buttons on it. And then there's a second screen up above it that's set, recessed deep under a hood. And so when you use the nav, the map is displayed on the upper screen, and then the audio controls and heated seats and some of the climate control stuff is displayed on the lower screen. And it's the interface they have on that older audio system is not great. It's really kind of counterintuitive. And it just doesn't work as well as the newer stuff that they have on the Hondas and will presumably have on the next generation of Acuras as well.
Yeah, that whole like double screen thing was always so confusing to me. And the new touchscreen audio system that Honda's rolled out is also not good. Maybe they can give it up and somebody else.
Yeah, well, the only real complaint I have about their touch radio setup is just the touch controls for the volume that are on the left-hand side of the screen. But even that is gone now on their latest, on the CR-V and the Odyssey. They've put back a rotary volume knob on there. So you don't even have to deal with the touch for the volume controls. So the rest of it, I'm fine with, as long as I have my Android Auto in there, and I can plug in my phone and use that interface. But the rest of the vehicle, is fine. Honda always does great seats. I'm very, very happy with the seats in the MDX. The powertrain is lovely. It's their 290 horsepower, 3.5 liter direct injected V6, 9-speed automatic transmission. It's got plenty of get up and go. Ride quality is fine for a big 3-row SUV. So I don't have any other notable complaints about the thing other than the infotainment system and the what else? Oh, and the shifter. Everything else is pretty good. It's got plenty of room in the second row. Third row is a little on the tight side. It's definitely more for occasional use and for small kids. You definitely don't want to be in there for a road trip. If you're any older than about 10, teenagers in that third row are probably not going to be too happy. But you can drop down those third row seats and have lots of cargo space in the back if you don't need the extra 2 seats. So overall, I like driving it, and the ADAS features, the driver assist features, work really nicely. The adaptive cruise control is a full stop and go system, which is nice in traffic. Then the lane keeping system works well too.
I'm surprised that some automakers, especially luxury automakers, sell automated cruise that's not stop and go like that. Like it gives up.
Yeah. Well, what it is, the reason why, earlier adaptive cruise systems, cut out at about, typically somewhere between 10 and 20 miles an hour is, the range, the measuring range of the radar. So they were, you had longer range radar, it was running at a different frequency. And it had a longer range that it could measure down the road, but because of the frequency, it couldn't give you very accurate measurements up close at shorter range. And so the newer systems that have full stop and go capability, what they've done is they actually use 2 different radar sensors. They've got a long range radar and a short range radar, and it switches between those. So at lower speeds, it uses the short range radar, and that's what gives you the full stop and go capability. And then once you get above a certain speed threshold, then it switches over to the long range radar.
That's interesting. So I guess that's something as they go ahead and update their models and give them their refreshes and their redesigns, that will start to trickle into the cars. I think.
Yeah, most newer models, most cars that have been introduced in the last 3 or 4 years have, full speed capability. So, probably, within the next 2 to 3 years, everything with ACC on there will probably have full speed capability.
Well, that explains an awful lot about the car I spent the most time with this week, which was the Lexus ES300H. So I had the ES300 hybrid. And that had one of those systems where, it would just kind of crap out. It'd be like in traffic, it would just give you a couple of beeps and be like, nope, you take the wheel. Like, that's exactly where I want automated cruise, is in stop and go.
That's where it works great.
Yeah. So, and I was a little surprised by the fact that it didn't have that functionality. But I will chalk it up to the ES300H being a little bit longer in the tooth, but it's not.
It's at the end of its life cycle. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, but now I'm stumbling a little because I'm not sure that it is.
Within the next year, it'll probably get replaced. Like if we don't see the next generation ES this year, then we'll probably see it next year, beginning of next year, by the Detroit Auto Show. That's when it's going to move to the new TNGA platform. So we just got the new Camry last month at the Detroit Auto Show, and we'll probably get the next gen ES, which is based on the same platform, no later than next year's Detroit show, and maybe sooner than that.
Yeah. Then it is at the end of its life. And I'm just confused because I knew that we had the new Camry, and I was like, no, they've already reintroduced. Okay. Now it all makes a lot more sense. And that's about all I have to say about the ES300H, because it's that kind of car where it's just like, people ask me how do you like it? What do you think about it? I'm like, I don't know.
Over the years, people have often referred to the Camry as the definition of a beige car, something that just disappears into the background. But even compared to the ES, even the Camry tends to be a little more exciting, at least in recent years in its design. The ES, it's a nice enough car, but there is absolutely zero excitement about it.
Well, and that's the best thing, or the most descriptive thing I could say about it is, like, it is the perfect car for people who don't want anything to do with cars. You get in, especially in the hybrid, you get in, you press the button, you're going to get 30 plus miles per gallon, no matter pretty much anything you do. It's going to get like between 32 and 37 miles per gallon. This one I got like 34 and a half, and it spent a lot of time. We had snow and stuff, so it spent a lot of time at low speeds, sort of idling and keeping the heat going and all that stuff.
It's the ultimate premium appliance car.
Yeah, I mean, it's nice. It has some nice features. It is starting to feel a little bit behind the curve in some ways, like we talked about with the Cruise and Toyota's infotainment. The Entune system isn't great. But it's nice leather seating, and all of the stuff is there, and it's comfortable, it's quiet. It drives completely unobtrusively. Actually, one of the things that used to bug me is the way Toyotas would, and I keep saying Toyotas, they're going to get mad at me. Lexus vehicles, like, they always seem to wander a lot and on the highway and stuff. They seem to have tuned that out now, where this is just basically, it's you point the thing and you press the pedal and it goes. It's the ultimate kind of non-driving driving experience, which is exactly what the buyer who buys these things wants out of them. And I can see how, it's really attractive. It does nothing wrong. It has no bad habits. And that's part of the reason why
it has no habits at all.
Right. And that's part of the reason why I can't get passionate about it. That doesn't mean that it's a bad car. It actually means that it's a brilliant car, because it's really, really hard to do that. Its worst habit now is just, again, it's starting to age out, and they're going to fix that. So,
yeah. I mean, it's definitely the kind of car where you want to have, on your phone, an app that reminds you where you parked it, because, it will, it will literally disappear into the background. But like you said, I mean, for a lot of customers, that's exactly what they want. They want something that is going to be absolutely reliable. Start up every time they get in the car. Take them exactly where they need to go with no fuss, no muss. Coddle them, a little bit, in the interior. Have nice materials in the interior. Nicer materials than you'll find in a Camry, but all perfectly well executed. But as you say, with just zero passion.
Yeah. And that's okay. I mean, there are other things to be passionate about in life. The thing that kind of sticks in my craw is like, this was a $51,000 car. For 51 grand, you can get something that is actually nicer inside and has a bit more personality if that's what you want. And you can get something that ticks both of those boxes and is also just as reliable too. So there's choice out there. I mean, even if you were to just, go to like Infinity or, Genesis, we were talking about the Genesis cars we were driving. You can get a G80 for 51 grand. That's going to be a very impressive car for that price. It's a slightly different thing, but still, so there's,
it's not going to be as fuel efficient.
Right.
But on all other counts, it'll suit your needs just fine.
Yeah. It won't be a hybrid, but I mean, it's great that there's choice. And so that actually brings me to the next vehicle I had, which, I want to, I guess, just preface it with saying like this was a 2016 that was still in the fleet. So 17s are not likely to be all that different, but just keep in mind that I was evaluating a car with sort of a long fleet life behind it. So, but I had a Mitsubishi Outlander Sport SEL AWC. So it was all-wheel drive.
Well, actually, I think for 2017, the Outlander Sport, or maybe it was for 16, it did get a slight refresh of its front fascia. Does yours have some chrome on the front fascia?
Yeah, it got refreshed. So Mitsubishi keeps tweaking these. It keeps tweaking all its models, especially visually, like every year, because that's what you have to do when their product is, they don't have a ton of new products. So
you could say that
they're doing the best with what they've got, I guess. This vehicle made me think of an interesting point. Thus far during my career as an automotive journalist, there have been very few constants. Like every year the auto shows, but they're filled with new stuff, new production models, new flights of fancy. We actually see those concept cars wind up on the roads in 2-3 years. That's kind of the only other constant sort of thing I can think of. But even that, like, that's a constant of change. For more than a decade, one vehicle has remained as constant as it gets in the automotive world, and that is the Mitsubishi Outlander and Outlander Sport.
It's funny. Last week at the Chicago Auto Show, I was talking to Todd Lassa of Automobile Magazine about exactly that. We were at the Mitsubishi press conference where they unveiled a limited edition Outlander Sport, which I'm still not entirely sure exactly what was different about it. I think it had black wheels. That was it. That was the overall theme of the Chicago show. It had black wheels. Yeah. But
it's Cole's coming back.
We were talking. We were discussing, how long the Outlander Sport's been around. And you're right. It has been almost 10 years since it debuted with some minor tweaks to the front fascia and the lights, but essentially unchanged for 10 years.
Yeah. I mean, so the Outlander Sport's a little younger. It's a shorter wheelbase, but the Outlander itself has been around for a long time, on the same basic platform. So it's, I think what they did was not too long ago, they added more high strength steel to the platform. So they actually incremented the platform name from GS to GF. It's the same thing. Compare the wheelbase and the width. It is the same platform. They changed some of the steel in it, but it's not appreciably different. There have been some changes and updates over the long period of time these things have been in production. But that consistency is like, I always know what I'm going to get with the Outlander Sport. It's going to drive okay. The basic suspension geometry feels like it was set up by someone who understands, roll stiffness and handling. I've always been impressed by that to a degree. You know, like it's essentially an inexpensive compact hatch, but it handles itself okay out on the road. It's certainly not German, but you know, it's relatively comfortable. I'm trying to like go down the list of positives about it, because it's really easy to crap on a 10-year-old car, right? But it's a 10-year-old car. Of course, it's going to feel kind of behind the curve. You know.
Well, to be brutally honest, it didn't feel all that new even when it was new.
No, it felt 10 years old when it was new. I get it. But, you know, I mean, it's loud. It's cheaply built. It's the worst infotainment system ever. I knew before I got in this thing, I would not be able to get it to pair with my phone. And it wouldn't. But, you know, you get a lot for your money. I'm trying to think of its most direct competitor, and I keep coming back to like
that's mainly because it doesn't actually cost very much.
Right. Well, so the sticker on this, and nobody pays sticker for these, was like $26,290. That buys you a Forester Limited or like a Honda HR-V with that's a little smaller, but you get the HR-V EXL with nav. You can get yourself a RAV4, either an LE, or you can stretch to, you know, find a good deal on an XLE trim, or like a Hyundai Tucson Sport with all-wheel drive. So you think about those competitors, and then or even other cars they make you think of, and I don't think the Outlander Sport can really hold court in that kind of company.
I'm not going to argue with you on that
one. Yeah. So
let's put it this way. The last time I had an Outlander Sport to drive, I couldn't even bring myself to write a review of it.
Yeah, I just feel bad being such a jerk about it like that. Like, it's not a car I would recommend. I certainly wouldn't spend my own money on it, but if you're looking for a new car with a lot of stuff that's relatively comfortable, it's going to drive okay. I was concerned enough about the reliability ratings and stuff that, you know, I went and looked, and it's actually, you know, U.S. News puts it right in the middle of their reliability score. The warranty is good. Has a 5-year, 60,000-mile warranty, 10-year, 100,000 on the powertrain. Like, okay, it's loaded for $25,000. I really don't think resale's going to be there, but yeah, that and I guess that's about all I can say. Is like you get a lot of stuff on paper for your dough. Not really. Not the class of the field, I suppose, but it's a car.
Yeah. Hey, at least, you know, it's a new vehicle, comes with a warranty. Yeah. You know, so if you have any issues, you take it to the dealer and they fix it, and you know. So, you know, unlike buying a used car where you probably won't get a warranty unless you buy a certified pre-owned and, you know, pay too much for it. You know, at least you are getting a warranty, and so there's that. Yeah.
I mean, I it just feels unfair for me to but like you said, it came out when it came out. It wasn't also sort of the class of the field either. It's not like this was a really good car that just died on the vine. It was always only a mediocre car that they've kept mediocre. And that's, I mean, there needs to be a place for that, right? I do wonder what's going to happen with the Outlander with the tie up with Nissan now too.
Well, I think that, you know, that actually, there's some interesting potential there if they do some platform sharing with Nissan. I mean, I could certainly see, you know, next generation Outlander, and Outlander Sport, you know, perhaps being built off the Rogue and Rogue Sport platforms, and then, you know, maybe getting a replacement for the Mirage, you know, off of, you know, say the Micra platform or something like that. So, you know, there could be some interesting potential there, you know, having lower cost variants, you know, off the, you know, sharing the platforms with Nissan.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like that's such a bad thing. And, you know, also the Outlander Sport is pretty decent looking, and it's their top seller. So it's doing some things right. So
yeah,
we have belabored this point far too long. We should actually move on. Unless you had anything else you wanted to say.
No. Let's move on.
The biggest news item that I picked up on this week, I mean, this has been a news-filled week, even now, but GM and Opel, GM and PSA are actually trying to figure out how to spin Opel off to PSA. Word came that General Motors CEO Mary Barra is very seriously exploring the possibility of selling Opel or merging them with or doing some kind of deal with Peugeot SA. That's from the last time I checked in on this. I haven't really looked at it today. Has there been any more development with that?
There hasn't been any real notable news. I doubt that we will hear anything substantial until they actually have a deal finalized. GM has been trying to figure out what to do with Opel and Vauxhall for more than a decade. They've been, their European operations have been losing money for a long, long time. They've made some progress in the last few years, but it's a drain. It's been a drain on the business for since before GM went through bankruptcy, and so. They did their tie up with Fiat back in the early 2000s. When it was hoped that maybe they could merge Opel and Vauxhall with Fiat. And that never transpired. That didn't work out at all. And then there's been various discussions. During the whole bankruptcy reorganization, they looked at spinning it off. Or selling it somewhere, and that never happened. And there's no guarantee that this deal is going to get finalized either. But if it does, it raises some interesting possibilities. There's a number of ways that this could go. If they sell Opel and Vauxhall to PSA, will GM then, as part of that deal, will they get a stake in PSA? That's the sort of thing that often happens in these kinds of deals is, it's partly cash and partly stock, where, GM could maybe end up with holding, say 20% a share or 25% share of PSA.
Well, is that good for them? Do they want that? To me, PSA makes some interesting cars, but I don't know how much better they'd play.
Well, PSA has actually made quite a bit of a recovery in the last couple of years since Carlos Tavares took over as CEO. He came over from Renault Nissan, where he was basically second in command to Carlos Ghosn for many years. He was chief operating officer at the Renault Nissan Alliance. And
he makes me giggle. Sorry, I just think of Renault Alliance. Sorry.
Yeah.
Moving on.
Tavares was second in command to Ghosn, and he left to take over PSA. And they've actually been, they've been on a bit of a roll recently. They had been selling, their DS models as part of their Citroën lineup, and they now. Last year, they split those out, basically into a separate sub-brand. So they have Peugeot, Citroën, and DS now as their three brands. And, I guess this would add Opel and Vauxhall to that mix as well. I did see one report today that, regardless of how this transpires, that Opel is taking a look at becoming an all-electric brand.
Yeah, I saw that too. That's interesting. I don't know how good that is. I think they're just flailing at this point. They're just trying to figure out where Opel fits. And the weird thing for me is some of the things I like best out of GM have come from Opel, or at least the Regal, and I like the Regal. So
yeah, well, over the last 15 years or so, they've actually we've here in North America we've had two different GM brands basically take Opels and rebrand them, for the North American market. First it was Saturn. After they pivoted on Saturn in the early 2000s and stopped giving Saturn unique cars, they basically gave them, turned around and gave them rebranded Opels. And then, when Saturn died off, they switched that over to Buick. And so Buick ended up with the rebranded Opels, so you had the Regal, the the Encore, the little crossover, which is sold in Europe as the Opel Mokka, the Cascada, which came from the convertible, which came from Opel. So most of, and also the Verano, which is the Astra sedan. That all pretty much all of the Buick lineup has been coming from Opel over the last 8 or 9 years since the bankruptcy reorganization.
Yeah. So are they going to shoot themselves in the foot? Like, those are the small cars. That's why they held on to Opel in the first place, was, hey, they are European. Europeans know how to do small cars that people will buy, and they can make a profit. And they tried that with the Astra that didn't do anything here. It did not scare the Golf.
Yeah.
Let's say.
That generation of Astra, when it finally came over here as a Saturn, that was another one that was already, that had been around for a while. And, there were a lot of elements of that car that were more distinctly European, especially in terms of the interior, and just did not go over well with American buyers. But in the years since then, in the decade since that car came to the U.S. market, the market has shifted a bit. And we've seen more convergence, between what you find in European cars and in North American cars, and cars in Asia, for that matter. So today's Opels, are much closer to what you find here. And in fact, a lot of the, because they've done so much global engineering, and sharing of engineering between Europe and North America and also Asia, particularly with the team in South Korea. I think a lot of the expertise that that in the past would have been considered to be, the realm of Opel, now resides just as much in North America and in Korea as it does in Europe. So I think they probably think that they can engineer, small cars just as well without Opel, without having the expense of operating Opel and Vauxhall, and do a good job. And I suspect they could probably succeed pretty well with that.
Yeah, well, it seems like, another thought I had, like, nobody likes change. And I think that we've seen what happens when GM avoids changing because change is hard. We had to bail them out because of that. So hanging on to Opel just because change is difficult is probably not the best move for them. And the more I looked at it, the more I realized, this move looks like GM trying to actually get out of its own way and act more like BMW, and be a focused automaker that goes where the profit is and just, ruthlessly ties off the bleeders. If you have a model that's not working, you kill it. And while there are some intriguing and interesting things being done by Opel, like you said, there's so much coming from Asia now that maybe they don't need Opel and the expensive European labor, and maybe that's stuff that can be done elsewhere just as well, if not better. I have no complaints about any modern GM, the way they drive. So it's not like Opel has any kind of secret lock on how to make a car drive well.
Yeah, I mean, you look at, GM's small cars today, the Sonic, the Spark are both primarily engineered in South Korea.
Yeah.
And the Spark is built in South Korea and exported from there. The Sonic is built here, but the team in South Korea has primary engineering and design responsibility for that. The Bolt was done, primarily in Korea, and then with a lot of the engineering development work done here in the U.S. The Cruise, is very much a North American model. So I think it's certainly possible that if GM offloads Opel and Vauxhall to PSA, they could maintain a presence in the European market, with Chevrolet for mainstream brands, and then Cadillac is their premium models.
Well, so they've tried Chevrolet though, and that was my question. We had a little back channel discussion. Well, I had one back channel email among us when we were it came up, and there was a thing that went around to Forbes freelancers, and I was just like, well, they've tried Chevrolet a couple of times in Europe at least, and it's just like it hasn't really found any traction. Do they think that like third time's a charm or something, or do they even care?
I guess I'm not sure how much they do care at this point. Although, if they, I think they had the problem they had before, because they did have Opel and Vauxhall is, where do you bring Chevrolet into that market, into that region? And the way they did it was basically bringing in cheaper Chevrolets, so going for the low end with Chevrolets. But if you look at, the Chevrolets that we have today in North America, they're not cheap car. They're not, they are affordable, but they don't come across as cheap. And so, trying to sell those alongside the Opels, there was not really a notable difference in, the product quality. So, what would be the point of buying a Chevrolet, trying to push Chevrolet when you also had Opel, in the kind of the same segments, and they tried to push Opel up market a little bit, and didn't really have that much success with it, I think. So I think if they got rid of the Opel and Vauxhall brands, that they could go back into Europe with Chevrolet again, and sell it in kind of the same price segment as what they have done with Opel in the past. And it probably, at least for the near term, probably wouldn't do as well as Opel has done. But, I think there's some potential for growth there. And then the other thing too is, maybe they just don't really want to put that much effort into Europe because it has been a stagnant market in terms of overall sales. It's never, since the recession, there's been some growth, but it's been much slower than the growth we've had here in North America. So it's definitely a slower market than here or in China. China is where the big growth has been.
Yeah, and that was the next point I was going to kind of ponder was that they're headed for serious global competitiveness with China. And so GM is already dipping their toe into bringing Chinese market product elsewhere with the Envision too. Like that's kind of an experiment. I think that they're trying to prove that test case that it's not going to matter if it's even if it's built in China. And if you put China as the market that you're designing for, and everybody else gets to, dabble in those scraps, as it were, I guess, that's an interesting new model. But it's also probably a lot less expensive to develop a car for China and sell it everywhere else than it would be to develop it in Europe or the US and try to sell it into China. So that's an interesting prospect.
Yeah. GM is definitely one of the market leaders in China. They've done well there, particularly with Buick and to a lesser degree with Chevrolet and Cadillac. So maybe they just want to focus on that and North America, and just not even really try very much in Europe, where they see it, as just a market where there's just not much growth opportunity.
Is that a move that took you by surprise? Like we've seen GM pull back from other markets where it wasn't making enough, or if any profit. Russia and Indonesia they pulled out of, and so rather than lose your shirt trying to hammer out success in those conditions, my expectation would be that GM would act like old GM. They'd chase it with volume. They're not doing that. They're saying, we don't really want that. They're being smart, and trying to go for quality sales rather than quantity sales. If they can't make money selling the vehicles, then why bother? Refocus the business elsewhere where they can make money, and maybe focus on things where they're on new opportunities. Things like mobility services. And that's I suspect. I don't think that they'll
leave the European market entirely. That's because I think Europe is going to be one of those places, where mobility services are going to take off probably much more quickly than here in the US.
Oh, I think it's a much easier sell in Europe.
Yeah. And so, going into there, with, some of the, with perhaps with the Lyft brand, or certainly with Maven, which they've launched here as a car sharing service, maybe some other brand, for mobility services, and then using Chevrolet vehicles to support that. And that, maybe that's the way that they go back into Europe with Chevrolet is, instead of focusing on the retail side, focus on providing the mobility services with Chevrolet vehicles.
That's an interesting play. It's just, I'm interested to watch this happen just because GM had been the world's largest automaker in terms of volume. And it almost seems like they're saying, like, guys, you can have that volume game, Toyota and Ford and Volkswagen, like, fine, whatever, sell more cars than us. We don't care. We're going to focus on profit.
Well, I mean, look at the look at the smartphone market as an example. Google, with Android has, 80% or more of the global smartphone sales. But, Apple with, 20% of global sales of smartphones has 95% of all the profits.
Right.
So what would you rather have, the profits or the volumes?
Yeah. And when you have the volume, that's all you talk about is the volume. Like, oh, well, most phones are Androids. Like, yeah, that's great.
But if you don't make any money on it, who cares?
Right. And so, well, it'll be fascinating to watch. You mentioned of like Maven and mobility sort of brings me to the next topic I wanted to touch on. We had talked about this a little bit offline, was just what's going on with ride sharing and Uber in companies like that. And I know you actually spoke with a particular company out in LA, CJ and Go. And there's one here, Boston based, called Fasten. That's, women centric. Just watching what's going on with Uber, they're facing strikes and, just lots of kind of not great PR. There's a lot of companies that are adopting Uber style tech that are, established. Like we have Boston Coach out here, and they decided to develop their own app for ride hailing. And they've got the established fleet service and stuff. So some of that disruption that Uber brought is going to power, I think, the established companies. They're going to figure out how to make their service like Uber without actually skirting labor laws, which, will be unlike Uber.
Right. Well, the key thing about Uber that, when you look at their valuation, every time they do a fundraising round, and their latest valuation was something, $63 billion, based on their latest fundraising round. But the reality is what Uber does and what Lyft does and, other ride hailing companies in other parts of the world, once you understand the basics of that, I mean, there's not really much of a barrier to entry for new companies to come in and do the same thing. Even the network effect, there's no cost of changing. It's not like, if you, going back to the smartphone example for a moment, if you have an iPhone and you've bought a bunch of apps for your iPhone and you decide you want to switch to Android, now you've got to buy all those apps again. So there's a barrier, there's a cost of changing from one service to another. But with ride hailing, there is zero cost to change from one to another. I've usually had, both the Uber and Lyft apps on my phone. And for the most part, I prefer to use Lyft whenever I can, when I'm traveling. But if there's no Lyft rides available, then I'll grab an Uber if I have to. But, there's no barrier to entry for new companies coming in, and there's no cost for users to change, which makes the business proposition for any of these companies very tenuous. There's no ecosystem to keep people in. There's no lock-in for any particular service, so you can go and use any of these services at any time.
Yeah, the issue I think that other competitors to Uber and Lyft are going to have is that they're not Uber and Lyft. You know, the one thing that both of those brands,
the brand recognition,
right? Like you can go across the country. So right now, you know, like if you were here in Boston, you'd be summoning a car via, you know, to from Boston Coach or I forget the other brand they have. They basically merged. It was the two, Devel, I think, is the other chauffeur sort of black car operation out here. But like if you're in Denver, the biggest, one of the biggest companies out there is like the Green Cab Cooperative. And it's the same kind of thing. They built their own sort of Uber-like thing. You're going to have to know that and do research if you want to avoid using something like Uber when you're traveling versus like, yeah, Uber, yeah, fine, whatever. There's been some sketchy stuff with background reports and whatever. I've never had a problem. I've got the app on my phone. It's easy. Why would I, you know, hurt myself trying to do more stuff when I can just do this? So they definitely have that sort of first mover advantage. That's the thing that I don't know how these companies solve. Like, yes, you can build an app, you can really copy what they've done, and you can do it the right way with a better fleet and with a better, you know, sort of a better job on your HR so that you've got,
well, I think, you know, what, you know, the one group of companies that will potentially have an advantage in this space is the car makers, because like Uber and Lyft, they have name recognition, they have brand recognition. So, you know, if GM or Ford or Mercedes-Benz, you know, or any other automaker decides, you know, I mean, well, actually, they've already decided to get into this business. You know, they're all, you know, most of the major automakers are either involved in an ownership stake or partnership in some sort of mobility company, you know, and in some cases more than one, you know, so, you know, Ford has, you know, they've had a long tie up with Zipcar for car sharing, but they also have their own in-house service that they're developing, their dynamic shuttle service. They also own a San Francisco based company called Chariot, which back, I think on episode 3 or 4, we had an interview with the CEO of Chariot, you know, and they've got their whole smart mobility LLC subsidiary. You know, GM is, you know, got an ownership stake in Lyft. You know, so most of the big car makers are developing their own systems or investing in ride hailing platforms. And I think that their name recognition will be a key to making them successful in this space going forward.
Well, yeah, like, so certainly like Ford or Mercedes-Benz or something like that, that's useful name recognition, but they're either buying or branding, you know, launching a new brand. So they're going to have to say like, you know, Chariot by Ford or powered by Ford or some other way to get that brand recognition in there. So, you know,
I mean, in the case of Chariot, you know, you see these Ford Transit vans, you know, with a wrap, you know, all the way around the van, you know, it says Chariot all over the side and has Ford logos on it. I mean, you can't miss these things running around San Francisco and now Austin. So I think there's definitely, you know, they're building that brand recognition for those new brands as we speak.
Yeah, well, Austin's an interesting case because Uber and Lyft actually had a hissy fit and left because of that's regulatory stuff wise, you know, city and state regulations on these services make it either hard or difficult for them to do business. And, you know, these companies certainly want less regulation. Uber certainly does. They want to basically say like, no, we don't need that. We're not this, you know, we're not a cab company, even though they kind of are. And like, the drivers are not our employees, even though they kind of are. So, you know, depending on how hostile or how welcoming the various municipalities are, is going to drive which services are successful or not successful in those locales too.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. You know, so, you know, certainly, you know, Uber is not a global company by any stretch. I mean, they operate in a number of countries now, but, you know, they also last year they bailed out of the Chinese market entirely. You know, they were losing so much money there that they sold off their assets there to Didi Chuxing, which is a local company in China that, you know, does the same thing. So, they have not been, while they've had significant success in North America, that has not translated globally for them.
Well, and it's funny though to hear the stories like there's like DD camps, right, where the drivers will just like park and kind of nap. And we have the same thing here in like Walmart parking lots and stuff. Like we've got little camps of Uber drivers. So it's just a really interesting thing, and it's definitely going to shift the whole industry. So we'll see how that goes. In terms of other topics, we're going to stay on the GM tip a little bit. I don't have a ton to say about it, but the Cruise diesel gets a 52 mile per gallon EPA rating, which is pretty ridiculous. Yeah,
it's pretty impressive. I mean, it's the most fuel efficient non-hybrid in the U.S. market now, and even the first generation Cruise diesel was actually really efficient as well. I mean, it got a 47 highway rating, and when I reviewed one a couple of years ago, I easily got 40 miles per gallon combined with the thing, without really trying very hard. And the first gen Cruise diesel, GM, they sold about 2% of Cruise sales were the diesel, and GM managed to do that. It was pretty much an experiment for GM to see how Americans would would accept Cruise diesel. And they did that. They were selling about 2% of cruises with the diesel engine with zero marketing dollars. There was no advertising for this thing. It was basically purely word of mouth. And this time they're actually making a real push with the diesel, especially now that Volkswagen is out of the game. GM is putting this new 1.6 liter diesel into the Cruise, the new Chevy Equinox, and the GMC Terrain. And we'll probably, if those do okay, we'll probably see it in more models as well. Perhaps the Malibu as well.
What kind of collateral damage has been done to diesel though by Volkswagen's shenanigans though? I mean, I feel like they made things more difficult for GM, and yet GM had this stuff developed and ready to go to market. So it's like, well, we're not going to stop now. We'll lose all that money. We're going to have to put on our game face and get this done.
That's the multi-million-dollar question that we don't know the answer to yet. So far, GM has been very bullish on this thing, on this diesel engine, and they're pressing ahead with it. They have not canceled any of their plans for various diesel models. Same thing with Mazda. Last week in Chicago, I spoke with Robert Davis, and we'll have that interview on next week's show. But we talked about diesel, and he's also quite bullish on diesel, especially in the crossovers. He definitely thinks that there's going to be some demand for that. Diesel engines have done well in the trucks, particularly in the pickup trucks. Chrysler's had some good success with the Ram diesel. Ford is, they've announced that the 2018 F-150 is going to get a 3-liter diesel V6. They do pretty well with the diesels in the transit vans. So, I think that it looks like there's still some market demand for diesel, and if you're not going to get it from Volkswagen, those customers are going to look elsewhere.
Yeah, we'll see how they do. I mean, I certainly think that if they put enough effort and marketing dollars behind it, they can tell a story and get the story they want out there. So, I mean, we'll see how it does. I'm encouraged because I personally like diesels better than something like hybrids, although hybrids are, fast becoming very refined and, not hard to make a case for. The nice thing about diesel is you get the efficiency and you're not losing out on, the trunk space and, cargo room and that kind of stuff. And you don't have...
it all depends on the application, especially for utilities. I think diesels make a lot of sense. For some smaller cars, maybe the hybrids make a little more sense, especially if you're doing predominantly city driving where you can take advantage of regenerative braking. If you do mostly highway driving, as a lot of Americans do, the hybrid is not really very helpful in those situations. And so the diesel might be a better option for you.
Yeah. Well, yet another thing to keep an eye on and see how they do. I honestly, I'm interested in the Cruise, but I'm more interested in what Mazda's doing because, Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, they're finally launching the CX-5 diesel this summer, and, we'll see how it does. One of the things that was interesting last year, I was at a briefing with some Mazda executives last year, and, they told us that, since they launched their diesels in the Japanese market a few years ago, they now 70% of their sales in the Japanese domestic market are diesels.
Wow.
Yeah. I was shocked at that number.
How do you get?
Because diesels have never been big in Japan.
Yeah.
But Mazda has had some real success there with them.
Apparently Mazda diesels are big in Japan.
Yes.
Well, I mean, if they drive like Mazdas, it's kind of hard not to like it. I mean, they're certainly going to perform well. And that's, the last time I was in a cruise diesel, it was a nice little car, and that was a long time ago now. So, I mean, it's going to be even betterer. If that's a word. All right. Well, do we have any questions we wanted to get to? I know we'll keep it tight this week.
I believe we did get a few questions on Twitter this week after you put out the call yesterday. So let's see. First up from John, not so much a question as just, I think a comment about Smart announcing that they're going EV only in the U.S. market. Yeah,
that was another interesting thing. I think that's a really good play for them because they're so hateful in anything other than EV here, the way they're configured. Like they don't have a good transmission, and even now,
I haven't had a chance to drive the latest, the new Smart, but drove both of the first two generations. And they were not great, to say the least. Make you long for a Mitsubishi.
Really? I don't know about that.
Hey, at least the Mitsubishis had CVTs, that, didn't jerk around when you were, when they were shifting.
Well, and that's the thing. Like that's kind of like the one application where a CVT is perfect. A little city car like that, like, you're not going to notice the sort of wind up sensation or.
Right. Well, I mean, the Smart always seemed like the obvious choice to do, if you're going to go EV only, that small, 2-seat city car like that was always the obvious choice. And, why they didn't push that harder, always seemed bizarre, but I guess now they're going to.
Yeah. I have to admit that I kind of forget about Smart sometimes. I mean, like, I kind of even forget they're still like active and making new cars.
Yeah, it's been an interesting story here in the U.S. When they first launched a decade ago, Roger Penske, he was the distributor for Smart. He set up a separate company as within his group of companies that was handling, it was Smart USA, and he did the deal with Mercedes-Benz to bring in Smart to the U.S. market and sell them through his dealer network. And that when they finally got here, they turned out not to be as fuel efficient as everybody was hoping, especially for its size. And compared to other cars, at the same price point with, more seats, it didn't do that great. And so after a couple of years, he basically said, okay, I'm done, and basically handed it back to Mercedes, and Mercedes-Benz took it back over and, sold them through Mercedes dealers, but it's never really done that well.
Well, and so the issue though, I think, was also that, that powertrain, like the particular powertrain they got here in the US, it wasn't as good as what they had in Europe, but they weren't going to spend money to, bring in something different. I would have been interested to see what it's like with like a manual and that kind of stuff here, because that's not what it had. But
yeah. All right. Let's see what else we got from Groove. We had what's the newest mass-produced car that is almost completely off the roads today? So I guess what he's asking is, or she, or, what car is, a relatively recent introduction that, almost doesn't exist on the roads. And
that's super easy.
What's that?
Saab 94X.
Yeah. Okay.
Every time I see one, I'm like, what is that? Oh
yeah. They are pretty rare. Every once in a while I see one, or even the last generation 9.5.
The last 9.5. And here in communist New England, we have a few of those. And the people who have them, I'm sure they adore them. But like they are committed.
Yeah. Last 9.5 I saw was a couple of months ago, and it's probably been about 6 months since the last time I spotted a 9.4X.
I've seen one 9.4, two 9.4Xs in the wild.
Yeah, I've seen maybe 3 or 4. I think some of them, because the 9.4X, was the last SUV they did that was based on the Chevy Equinox platform.
Yeah, it was really good.
Yeah, but it's one of the models that it was just getting finished up just as the financial meltdown happened at the end of 2008, and they canceled the Saab brand, canceled production of it. They had built I think maybe about 2,500 of them. And I think, a bunch of them, I think, ended up getting sold off to GM employees at, very cut rate prices, and they auctioned off some, so there's, there were probably, fewer than 2,000 of them that were ever sold. And every once in a while they pop up somewhere.
Yeah. I mean, from what I understand too, like it's again, like you're going to run into problems trying to, keep one of those going. You even like don't break the windshield.
Yeah.
Because there are none. That kind of stuff. So yeah, that's about the newest one I can think of that you don't see anywhere.
I can't think of anything else. Let's see, what else do we have? I think that was about it from there. Let's see if there was anything in Facebook. I don't think there was any Facebook ones this week. Let's see.
Get some likes on Facebook.
Yeah. But no Facebook questions this week. So yeah, I guess that's it for listener questions this week. Anything else you want to add?
No, I mean, we had some kind of like ongoing discussion a little bit last week. I know we touched on it, and I actually felt a little bit less than prepared about the sort of the EPA question about abolishing the EPA. And the more that unfolds, the more I'm kind of slightly horrified by what could happen, just because you remove the EPA at the federal level, you're going to end up either with a patchwork at the state level or nothing, because the money for it comes from the federal level and states are already stretched. So if they don't have to, they're not going to do the things the EPA is already doing. And again, I don't think that those problems that the EPA has solved will stay solved without vigilance. So
right. And the thing is, a lot of the types of things that the EPA looks after, those kinds of problems are not the ones that respect state lines or borders. Polluted underground aquifers, they tend to stretch across borders, and it affects people, even in states where, they might want to do something about it. There's not a whole lot you can do.
Yeah, well, I mean, our air quality here in New England takes a hit because of, coal-fired power plants in, places like Ohio. So what do you do about that? Like is Massachusetts going to get in a fight with Ohio because we get their smoke?
Yeah, I mean, it's really the sort of thing that you need to deal with at the federal level.
Yeah. And the argument that China is not doing it, I think you will find that China, they spent the last 25 years industrializing very quickly, but they're also now investing very, very heavily in renewables because, being forward looking, I think one of the things that they're looking at is like they have such a definite air quality problem in so many places. Mention
that rapid pollution. Industrialization. They've recognized the cost of that, and they are actively trying to do something about it.
Yeah, and I mean it's just two different sort of systems of running a country and investing in things. Let's put that out there.
Well, in some respects, they're getting more alike now. But let's not delve into that.
We'll see how that plays out.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, so that's something like it's an ongoing concern, and I don't have much more than that to say.
Rational autocracy and irrational autocracy.
Yeah. But yeah, just sort of keep up with us on Twitter. I've actually been a lot more active on Twitter over the last few weeks. I even talked a little bit about the Volvo V90 and how, I'm kind of disappointed by the SPA architecture, but we'll see when I get that to drive if they've fixed it.
You should have seen the brown one they had here at the Detroit Auto Show last month.
I bet it was gorgeous.
It was.
I would. That's a car, like, even as disappointing as I find the SPA cars to drive, I would park it. Just look at it. Like they look so good. Like they look like $1 million inside and out. And so I'm
except for the infotainment system.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm anxiously awaiting when I'll be able to buy one of those for like pennies on the pound, which is how modern Volvos have gone. That was my entry into Volvo, was like, oh yeah, that's an expensive European luxury car to fix. You can buy that for $500.
And then fix it yourself.
Yeah, I learned a lot. My last experiences were a little bit frustrating because of all the modern technology, and it really soured me on automatic transmissions again, because clutches are pretty simple.
Yeah.
Not a whole lot to break. But yeah, so find us on Twitter. We are at Wheelbearings, no vowels. We are on Facebook.
Wheelbearings Cast, actually.
Wheelbearings Cast. I'm sorry.
Yes.
But yeah, no vowels in Wheelbearings, but there's an A in Cast.
No, actually there isn't.
Okay. I completely screwed that up.
We're completely devoid of vowels.
No vowels. You are at Sam Abul Samid on Twitter.
Twitter, and I mean, just look for my name anywhere, and you'll find me. Everything is under my name. And one other thing I wanted to mention is I put up on the site on wheelbearings.media. There's a link to a survey. If you're listening, if you wouldn't mind taking a couple of minutes to fill out a survey, let us know a little bit about you. At some point we'd hope to maybe get some ads on the show. Maybe not. We'll see. If anybody wants to pay us a little bit, but it would help us to know a little bit of demographic information. So you can, if you go to the site at wheelbearings.media, right at the top of the page there's a link, or just go to bit.ly/WB survey 17. And we would really appreciate that. And then tell all your friends about the show, and, get them to subscribe too.
We're building an audience. It keeps growing steadily. We keep trying to do episodes that are topical and interesting. So keep the feedback coming. Certainly, where to find us. Give us some more reviews if you care to, if you have time, on iTunes and all of those things. And until next week, that's Wheelbearings.
See ya.